Hello, good evening. Namaste, namaskaram. Uh, Today, we'll talk about the fuel price rise and how it's been fluctuating over many points of time in the past, the reason why this happens, and also to understand how has been our India's energy growth story. It's important to understand the context so that the average Indian citizen is more confident about where one is living and what is this country's progress in terms of the energy sector and not panic in the face of such fuel prices being fluctuated over a period of time. So we would call the last decade of India's energy story as a decade of reform and resilience. With about 3.59 times is the renewable energy capacity growth since 2014. We're ranked number three in globally in terms of renewable energy capacity, and 38% of our supply sources come from Russian crude, which is again a great supply diversification strategy. And our ethanol blending is also on target. 48 times has been the solar expansion from 2.8 gigawatts to 135 gigawatt in 12 years. And in July 2025, renewables met 51.5% of India's electricity demand, which is a historic first. And we ranked number three globally in terms of renewable energy ranking. We've surpassed Brazil and behind only China and USA. Solar tariffs also fell by about 90% from 18 per kilowatt hour in 2010 to 2 per kilowatt hour in 2026. And wind has been the best ever year with 6.05 gigawatt added in FY 25-26. So it's also important to understand the decade of bold reforms that were. So some of the bold reforms, the four bold reforms that I would like to highlight in this podcast. One is the October 2014 reform, which was a diesel price decontrol, which ended decades of diesel subsidies that had swollen India's fiscal deficit. And we removed about 83,000 crore of annual subsidies, which was actually deflating the economy. And market-linked pricing was introduced, and which restored discipline and eliminated a 83,000 crore annual subsidy drain. Then we moved to the daily dynamic pricing in 2017, and we became one of the few large democracies to adopt daily fuel price revision aligned to global crude and ending opaque, politically timed hikes and bringing global best practices to Indian consumers. In November 2021, we had a record excise relief done in November during Diwali. It was the first ever single excise duty cut by 5 per liter on petrol and 10 per liter on diesel. And 10 BJP governed states followed immediately with VAT cuts of 7 to 12 rupees per liter, compounding the relief. And ethanol blending has been going very steadily progressing. Blending 20% ethanol in petrol actually reduces our import dependence, supports farmers through higher prices for their sugarcane, and cuts the vehicular emissions and saves about 35,000 crore in crude costs annually. So, what is India in context? It's important to understand how our neighboring countries are with reference to petrol prices, how are they charging, and what is our position globally as well. Pakistan and Sri Lanka, as we all know, delayed market pricing for political reasons and paid with fiscal collapse and IMF bailouts. Nepal is entirely dependent on India for supply and now has the highest prices in South Asia at about $1.48 per liter, which is about 145 rupees per liter. India's disciplined move to market-linked pricing since 2014 has avoided these traps. And India's per capita is also nearly 2 times that of Pakistan's, making the same liter more affordable. And if you look at it globally, countries like Germany and France, the European countries, charge about 2 times the price for per liter for petrol than India, but they have about 20 times the per capita income as India. So the Hormuz crisis, which we are all talking about, the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked since the war began in February 2026, and because of which our 40% of our reserves crude was actually flowing through the Hormuz Strait, and therefore the crude per barrel, the price of crude per barrel shot up from $69 to $157. So it's important to understand the pricing mechanism of petrol and diesel also. It starts with the crude prices. Then to add to that is the logistic cost, the transportation cost of fuel, and then the central excise is charged by the government of India, the state VAT is charged, and then the final pricing of petrol comes out from this formula. So each and every rise or fall in any of these components would lead to a multiplying effect on the price of petrol and diesel. So it's not just about the government of India deciding a particular price; it's linked to the international prices of crude. So what has been our 6-point crisis response? It's been commendable, like we do in all other crises. Like the pandemic, we've reacted and responded swiftly, which saved India from a lot of loss, which could have otherwise incurred if we hadn't acted swiftly. So this time, our crisis response has been to, open up our strategic petroleum reserves in Visakhapatnam, Bangalore, etc. Calibrated excise duty adjustments to partially offset the rising crude cost has been done. Natural gas control order, which LNG supply has been rationed and prioritized. Diplomatic engagement has led to our safe passage negotiations for Indian flag vessels. And the Russia supply corridor, which contributes about 38% of imports, providing non-Hormuz buffer. The way forward for India would be to expand the strategic reserves, target about 120 days of crude stock from 69 days and build new inland caverns. A GST for petroleum is an important point because it's proven mathematically that GST, if introduced, would actually lower the prices of petrol and diesel substantially. So if all other states cooperate, then GST for petrol and diesel would bring a huge relief, at least domestically, in the domestic context of fuel prices. EV and charging push is an important policy reform that's been undertaken by Delhi already. So we need to have mandatory two-wheeler EV targets done. 1 million public chargers by 2030 should be the target ideally. Full E20 blending, 10 to 12% reduction in petrol import dependence, and 35,000 crore of annual saving actually happens if we do this E20 blending, the ethanol blending. And diversify the supply. We have deeper ties with Africa and the US LNG and reduce any single corridor risk. So this is the way forward, the small strategic advice that we can give, but it's been a commendable response system that India has done to the energy crisis, buffering us to a large extent, ring-fencing the India and Indian citizens from the great fuel price hikes that are there globally. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you found this podcast useful. Nandi, namaskar.